I've been thinking a lot about this concept of de-sexualizing the mind, and I don't think it's entirely accurate. I think it's more accurate to say that, what we're actually trying to do is have a better relationship with our sexuality. And if there's anything that we're trying to or undo or reverse, it is lust. It is the emotion of lust. Lust is a craving, is a wanting, is a desiring. It is a state actually of not having. And the more and more you begin to identify with that state, the more and more you begin to identify with an identity, like the clothes that you wear every single day, and present yourself to the world as somebody that is in a state of not wanting, not having, and never being whole. And that's a very cruel trick that you play on yourself, because fundamentally it's not really true. It's not really real, right? Your mind only makes it real by interfacing with these kind of crystal balls in the forms of laptops, tablets, phones, and tricking you into believing that you're in a state of not having, because it is the ultimate comparison tool. There's always something to compare and reference your life in relation to another. If you think about, it's a really interesting mental idea to conceptualize and think on and meditate on and contemplate, is the notion that our opportunity for comparison 100 years ago, which isn't even that long, that's one bloodline, was zero compared to what we have now. Like the distances we've come in that very short amount of time is unparalleled, unprecedented. I don't think we'll ever see it again. So it's a very unique and interesting time that we live in, as we have to acclimatize to the fact that 100 years ago, you could only compare yourself to the people in your village. I mean, think about that. Like, if you're a farmer, you can only compare your farm to the other farms that are around your village. Not even in your country, just your local village. Like a radius of 10 miles, 20 miles, 25 miles? Whereas now, you pick up a device like this, you open your favorite social media application, and you can compare your life to a billionaire in Dubai who's 20 years old and whose father has given them a Lamborghini for their 20th birthday. And immediately you look at your life in that lens, from that perspective, compared to that individual. And what that does to your psychology is very unbecoming of the reality of your present circumstances and situations. So back to this notion of lust, which I believe is pervasive. And I actually believe it goes beyond, as per that last example, just the sexual dimension. Lust, again, is a state of not having, of chasing. And in that way, the comedic nature of God and the universe is that you repel it. So what must we do? Let's talk about some actionable steps, because I don't just want this to be a lecture, right? Even though I do enjoy lecturing, right? Maybe enjoy the sound of my voice too much. I'm gonna be transparent with you. So, how do we de-lustify our life in that context? Well, first and foremost, I think taking the typical road in relation to mitigating that particular emotion is understanding that first and foremost that you have emotions, and that you are not your emotion. Now, this is a very spiritual concept. It's also a psychological concept as well. And a lot of continuity in this particular spiritual idea follows all roads of religion. It's actually the starting point for most religions, is to fundamentally disidentify from the emotions that you feel, and you know them and understand them from an observational point of view as opposed to an identity point of view. So the idea is like take that clothes analogy that I shared with you a little bit earlier. A lot of people who had experienced several kinds of, or let's say consistent emotions every single day or every single week, every single month, what begins to happen if you experience them more often than not in that kind of sequence, you begin to make it your identity. Like that for me is the craziest thing. And I can look back in my life at several kind of emotions that I begin to wear as items of clothing. Like you put a hat on, like you put a vest on, like you put a shirt on, like you put a watch on. They become part and parcel of how you present yourself to the world. Like there are some people that I know in my life that a particular emotion springs to mind when their face kind of enters my imagination or my memory, right? And there's one guy I used to go to school with. I won't tell his name, but every single time I think about this person, I just think of anger. Like that was his identity, was just anger. This individual was bubbling so close to the surface constantly. You couldn't banter with him. You couldn't do any light-hearted jokes because he would take it so personally and he'd flip off the script and he would immediately go to like physical violence. So you have to be very, very careful about how you have to change your consciousness when you're interacting with this kind of person, because they don't know that spiritual concept that I just fleshed out for you, or I kind of drew the outline of it, right? Is there's a difference between experiencing an emotion and being an emotion. And this individual was like the manifestation of anger, right? If anger had a form, he was it. And then you come to the spiritual idea, and I hope this individual has learned since last seeing him. I haven't seen him for a long, long time. That you can just observe it. You can just observe the emotion of anger and how it kind of permeates your body. Where does it manifest? Does it manifest in tension in the jaw, in the neck muscles, in the shoulders, in the arms, in the hands? Do you get sweaty? I used to get a lot of tension in my stomach, my kind of intestines, whenever I was getting anxiety. I would get heat flushes up the neck. I would feel tension in the jaw. I would get certain pain in the front of my head here. And all it is a bringing your attention and awareness to the physical manifestations of that energy in motion, emotion, energy in motion, and allowing yourself to induce a parasympathetic response through the medium of breathing. It's nothing fancy. It really is nothing fancy. I know with very existential, highbrow problems like depression, like anxiety, it feels like we need to meet it on that kind of level, but I guess that's kind of our subjectivity we place upon it. Oh, depression, anxiety, so prevalent, so difficult to dissipate. The most effective antidotes for these kinds of things are usually the simplest ones. They're usually the simplest ones. I used to get terrible, terrible insomnia. Like I could not sleep through the night, couldn't even get to sleep. And I used to self-medicate through cannabis. And that was the story I used to tell myself. And that, again, maybe indirectly, I'm trying to think of the emotion, maybe anxiety was the emotion there, certainly. I'd made anxiety part of my personality. That's how I would introduce myself to people. That's how I would describe myself. It wouldn't take long if I was meeting a new person to talk about what I found difficult in my life, and what I found difficult in my life was anxiety and that I couldn't sleep. One of the things that I used to get over that was smoke a lot of cannabis, and that again became another extension of my personality. I started meditating instead of medicating. Insomnia went away. So it's strange. It's strange the stories you tell yourself about who you are. And I know I'm going kind of rather circuitously around, the subject of lust here. I'm not really, because we're talking about an emotion fundamentally. We're looking at it from a kind of very strategical point of view. You can interchange anger, you can interchange anxiety with lust, because that's what we're trying to mitigate here. Sexuality, de-sexualizing yourself, you're never going to do unless you remove your consciousness from this human form and put it into the cold shell, the ghost in the shell, the cyborg, the AI. Because we're animals at the end of the day. That's part and parcel of how our brains evolved from, if you go deep into the mind, into the brain, you've got primal instincts. You've got eat and you've got have sex. And, it's interesting the continuity of how those two things address the individual and the collective. Now, think about that. It's a really interesting concept. So the primal instincts essentially serve for survival of the organism, eat, right? the impulse to eat is one of the strongest ones. And the impulse to have sex is, some people would argue, even stronger than the urge to eat after you've gone through puberty, right? So eat, individual, have sex, collective, survival of the human race, survival of the species. Now, we're not going to be able to separate ourselves from that kind of basic instinct in that respect, because we're not going to be able to remove ourselves from our very biology. We're getting to that point with Elon Musk and neural chip, whatever the case may be, is in that. And, the extensions of that, or the iterations on that, are certainly going to be, you can live forever by removing your consciousness and putting it into a robot body. But it's something that we're not going to get away from. So sexualization, being sexual, is part and parcel of the consciousness, or the vehicle in which we experience the world. Think about that. Like, the body is the vehicle in which we kind of drive and navigate the world. And we're not going to be able to get out of the car. However, you can view some of the features of the car, and some of the features of the car are the sexual dimension in which we experience the world and experience other people, from a detached point of view. And in that way, we remain better in control of fundamentally the truth of the existence, which is we are the witness, we are the observer, we are the soul, we are the pneuma, right? We're not, it's a mistake. It's very shallow to believe that you are the body or the mind, because you can have thoughts and not believe those thoughts. You can have feelings, and those feelings may not be fundamentally, you don't have to act on those feelings. And that's the concept. So where do we go from this? And the practical tools I've kind of layered in through this particular lecture. I told you I wasn't going to lecture, but yeah, guess what? Guess what happened? The practical tools that we need to instill upon us are allowing us to get more identified, or not identified, because identification is what we want to mitigate here, is more control over the truth that we are the observer of the emotion and we're not the actual emotion. And that happens when you can cultivate a sense of mindfulness through any and every given moment. So meditation, of course, it's got to be meditation. You already know what to do. You know the answer to the question. You really do. But the reason why individuals struggle is because their reasoning probably isn't good. So they don't have strong enough reasoning to start meditating every day. And by the way, it doesn't have to be meditation. It could be Tai Chi, Qigong, breath work, anything that allows you to observe your thoughts and your emotions from a very neutral perspective. Don't get subjective about it. You need to be objective. Just look at it. And kind of the interesting idea or approach I like to make is almost from the perspective of a scientist or somebody who's conducting an experiment. So I'm sitting inside my body and I'm kind of going, oh, that's interesting. The emotion of lust has just awoken in me. What sensations are associated with the feelings of lust? Well, I can feel vasodilation to certain areas of my body, typically the southern region, right? I can see my mind start to go into a direction where I'm entertaining certain fantasies. Maybe I start feeling shame because I shouldn't be feeling this. So shame and lust at the same time. Interesting, really curious. So it's that kind of perspective. The moment where you lose is where you believe because you have an emotion, you have to act upon it. For my friend, for example, my very angry friend, he always acted upon his anger. He always went to physical violence. You don't have to resort to take an action upon your particular feeling at that time. I still get lustful thoughts. I still get lustful feelings. I still get depressive feelings. Not as frequent. I do believe that as you get better at these kinds of practical habits, that the frequency in which you experience them gets less and less and less, especially when you allow yourself to identify with emotions that are north of courage. So the idea is, if there's an emotion that you want to identify with, you kind of embrace it and let it in, such as love, such as joy, such as courage, such as peace, such as tranquility. And all of these, I think, oscillate north of 400 as per David Hawkinson's consciousness scale. So if you don't know what I'm referring to, you've got let it go, letting go, The Pathway of Surrender by David Hawkins, or you've got Power versus Force. He's got a number of different books that really helped me flesh out this idea a little bit more comprehensively. You could also talk about Levels of Energy by Frederick Dodson, which works upon the similar kind of concept. Or you also have the Sidonia method, which falls congruent with both of the previous premises of those books, and they can be very, very resourceful. So you want to identify with peace, love, and all these higher emotions, and you don't want to let your soul and your consciousness be sullied and poisoned and identified with the lower ones. Nobody likes hanging out with these people. They're not fun at parties. Yeah, I don't see that friend anymore because he was always angry all the time, and there was no levity to the conversation. You don't want to be the guy, and I'm sure you know the kind of personality that I'm speaking about, who's always identified with lust, who wants to go to the strip club, he wants to go to the bars, he's constantly chasing women. Like, you can't just sit down and have a conversation without him kind of itching to call his dealer, go get some white girl interrupted, it's a colloquial term, or some weed or some other paraphernalia, because again, he's in that kind of craving emotion, right? He's become that craving emotion. He constantly wants to keep escalating things until he passes out or he kills himself. And those individuals typically do kill themselves. That's where this notion of addictive personality comes in. You don't have an addictive personality. You have a problem with identifying with a emotion of craving. That's an addictive personality. If you just sat in a quiet place and just observed for a moment, you'd get more control. And there's some areas of the brain that develop more with neuroconnections. I think there's an area, I believe it's called the basal ganglia. I might be completely, don't quote me on that. I'll do some research to bring you a little bit more scientific fact in this regard. But there's areas of the brain that get denser and denser the more and more you're doing behaviors that are associated with presence, consciousness, and mindfulness. And Huberman talks about this. And the more and more you can it's like a muscle, right? You're developing that area to be stronger. You go to the gym, you start bench pressing, you're not going to be able to even lift the barbell because the barbell is 20 kg. Well, you do a couple of repetitions and maybe you can put 5 on either side, then 10, then 20. Then next thing you know, you're benching 315. So the idea is start small. Don't give yourself this very outlandish and unrealistic expectations of sitting down and meditating for an hour. You're not going to be able to do it. Well, the first time I started meditating, I couldn't even do 5 minutes. Do 2 minutes 30. Can't do 2 minutes 30, do 1 minute. Quality, in my experience, is more important than the quantity. Although there is a metric that can certainly be conducive to you getting more development and hypertrophy in these areas of the brain. But you can also use things like breath work. Breath work is a more active version of meditation, you can kind of combine those two together. That's what I do. I don't just meditate anymore. I do both. I do breath work and then I do meditation, because I find my meditations are deeper when I include an element of breath work in them. Or some kind of breathing practice. It could be pranayama, it could be tumo, could be vase breathing, could be anything. As long as you're incorporating those two particular techniques, you'll be able to strengthen the areas of your brain that are more associated with witnessing and observing an emotion as opposed to identifying with emotion. It's the difference between being responsive and reactive. You don't want to be reactive. Reactive is a very feminine kind of quality. It's a lack of control. It's not stoic. You're trying to be stoic here, so practice being stoic. If you practice reactivity, then practice getting emotionally compromised. Practice putting yourselves in a position where you're frequently getting stimulated to be lustful, to be angry, to be the emotions that you fundamentally don't want. The answers are fairly logical and rational when you can kind of pass them out from this observer, top-down perspective, kind of like a commander looking at his army. I used to play a lot of RTS games when I was younger. Still sometimes now, I'm not going to lie to you. I just love the concept of strategy. In that way, you have to think of yourself like you're commanding your army. You need resources. You need a plan of attack. You need to understand where your weaknesses are and bolster those weaknesses. You need to understand how to strengthen your weaknesses. And one of the areas of huge weakness for most people now is they get in a reactive state very, very quickly because their environment is saturated with content that allows them to be reactive. You kind of train yourself in that way. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to train ourselves to be more responsive, the antithesis of that. So delustifying the mind, that is certainly a mechanism that I would wholeheartedly encourage you to envelop, embrace, and fully throw yourself in. I don't believe it is something that you can suggest to the modern man and woman, and even woman now. I believe it's a mandatory practice. It's kind of, when we accept the benefits of technology, we accept the side effects. And when you do that, you put in preventative measures in order to mitigate those side effects. And one of the biggest side effects is reactivity. It's emotionally compromised. It's lower negative emotion. That object for comparison, so large. These aren't theories, gentlemen. These are facts. Speak soon.